This is Reinomo's podcast, The Creative Mindset.
Hi, this is Reinomoto. Welcome to The Creative Mindset, a podcast about building a creative career through conversations with the world's best practitioners. We talk with artists, designers, architects, curators, chefs, and other luminaries of diverse creative pursuits. Just a little background about this podcast. We started this project in the fall of 2022 initially for the Japanese market as a way to provide inspiration to that audience from outside of Japan. I reached out to a few friends and acquaintances of mine that I respect in various creative industries and asked if we could record our conversations. Since it was for the Japanese audience, we released these conversations dubbed in Japanese, but there was such a strong demand for the English version of the conversations, so here we are. The first episode is with Ian Spalter, former head of design at Instagram. You might recognize his name because he's a superstar in the digital design world. He was featured in a Netflix special called The Abstract, The Art of Design. He currently resides in Tokyo, where he moved a few years ago to lead Instagram's office in Japan. He now oversees design for the metaverse at Instagram/Meta. And he and I used to be colleagues almost 2 decades ago. That's several lifetimes away. My conversation with Ian spanned from how he first found his calling in design by doing boring tasks, how he faced challenges as a Black designer, and how he fosters creativity in a business environment where creativity might not happen naturally. All of it was so rich that we decided to split into 2 parts. So here's the first part of my conversations with Ian Spalter. So let's get started. I wanted to start the conversation with is creativity in one's career and how one gets into that path on that journey. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about how you got into not just this industry, but creativity as the main avenue for your career.
I think that the things that inspired me the most and captured my imagination as a kid were these fields of creativity. So whether it was films like Star Wars or playing with Legos or things like that. Yeah, I grew up in an area called New Rochelle, New York, which is a suburb right above the Bronx. And my parents grew up there, and it's it's known as a pretty diverse suburb, both in terms of ethnic diversity, racial diversity, but also socioeconomic diversity. Went to public schools my whole life, but at that time it was a very good public school system, so that I could be exposed to things like this. To drafting, actually drawing, 3D sketches, isometric drawings, basic things like that. And it was around that time that I started to understand that that was a thing you could do, and started to learn about industrial design a little bit, that was something that was happening, like frog design was big then. And I was introduced to some of that. I had good arts programs and things like that. And I think that definitely had an impact on my career choices.
Mm-hmm. Were there any influences either from your parents or from your teachers, from your friends, or even, college? How did you pursue?
I think, even though I had that initial spark around design and also around computing, I can remember friends who had early Macintosh computers and being able to use those, and that was like magic, right? So I was always attracted to computing and graphics at an early age. I'd say high school, there wasn't as much opportunity to do a lot of those things, and so I kind of lost my way. I think I didn't go into and look for design programs, but I ended up at a small college called Hampshire College in Amherst, Massachusetts. And it was a sort of very progressive school where you could basically put together your own major. And that was a new concept then. Now NYU has these sorts of programs. Lots of larger universities have this. But Hampshire was pretty early, and was also early in having access to the internet. It had fiber optics long before, wired into people's rooms, far before other universities did. So I got exposure to kind of the next wave of digital technology pretty early, power PCs, things like that, right? And so I used to be what we call a lab rat, which is someone who just lives in the computer lab. Mm-hmm. I was that, learning all the different software and just experimenting. At the same time, taking courses in human factors or human computer interaction or basic computer graphics classes in C, and exposing myself to those things. and kind of piecing together a type of curriculum for myself, which eventually led to things like internships and things, because at that time, everything was new. So it wasn't as if you could go to a program and then get an internship at some big tech company. Everyone was figuring it out. So, and even if you had a traditional graphic design background, you might be at a disadvantage when you're thinking about the web, for instance, or CD-ROMs. So, yeah.
So it doesn't sound like it wasn't like, hey, this is a graphic design major or this is an industrial design major that you pursue. It was sort of a mix and match, design your own academic
patched
major.
It together, really.
Yeah.
Based off my interests and what was available at the time.
Yeah. So when you graduated, what was the degree that you had?
I had a basic liberal arts degree.
Got it.
Yeah, so a Bachelor of Arts, basically.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the beginning of your professional career after that then.
So I was fortunate during my college years to start to intern. There was a place called New York Online, which was a pre-web online community that you use dial-up modems to call into and kind of a bulletin board system. And that company was starting to consult for this new thing called the World Wide Web. And companies that were interested in creating their first web pages would go to this company to create them. And so I was an early intern there in the summertime. And so when I graduated, I went to work part-time for that company, a man named Omar Wasso. And ultimately that company got bought by Community Connect, or basically acqui-hired. They didn't call it that, but they scooped us up and we went to build Black Planet. So that's how I kind of started professionally, I'd say.
Yeah. Everybody, I think, has a turning point in their career.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your early ones and let's take it from there.
I think some of the earliest ones were simple things. Like I can remember having a freelance job where I basically cut assets for 8 hours. And for those who don't know what that looks like, it's like you're sitting, imagine cutting out shapes on a piece of paper again and again and again for 8 hours, but doing it on a computer screen. And I can remember after feeling that day, feeling like, oh, I can do this. Like I can sit in front of a computer and design and do this work, even if it is just rigorous, repetitive work. I'm capable of this. And there's this a weird moment, a light bulb in my head that this is like, okay, this is for me.
Do you remember how old you were?
Right. So I had to be like in my 20s, like early 20s or something like that. Right. It was just like, I don't even know if I must have had another job and this was like a side job or something. But it was just a funny moment that was really memorable for me to feel like, oh, that was a good day's work. Right. And I don't know why it sticks with me, but it did.
So to fast forward, or just to summarize your career, you had your beginning in the early 2000s, sounds like. Yeah. And then we met around 2003, 2004, working at this agency called RGA, which at the time was a medium-sized, design/technology. I don't know if we called ourselves an agency yet.
No.
It was a design company, design and technology company.
Yeah.
And how long were you at RGA total?
So I worked there twice. I was one of the boomerangs, right? So I think I maybe a total put in about 6 years at RGA, but the first stint was shorter than the second, I think. I think the first stint was maybe under 3 years.
Okay.
And then the second one was more like 4.
Right.
I think.
Yeah. We overlapped maybe about 2 years, I think.
Yeah, the first 2 years we overlapped. And you were up in the Nike land, and I was working on various clients like T-Mobile, or eventually Nokia was the big one.
Right. Yeah. So for the listeners, just to paint a picture of what it was like in the early internet design industry, this thing called the internet or the World Wide Web was becoming a thing, and major clients were starting to be interested in as a channel, as a medium to market and advertising and communicate with their customers. I remember, I think it was in 2001, and this was the first time that I was still in my mid 20s, I think, was asked to lead a pitch for Nike.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I can't remember if it was before you joined.
Before I joined.
Before you joined.
Yeah,
okay.
the work was already there.
By the time you got there, the work was there.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one of the first times when a major brand would ask an agency to be a dedicated partner, called the agency of record. Yeah. And it was new at the time because this digital medium was a new thing, and the brands weren't taking it seriously, but Nike was one of the early ones to do so. And I think it was like 5 or 6 different companies like RGA and a few other companies did a pitch. And yeah, Nike, I think, was one of the first major accounts that RGA had won. And initially, I think it was about 20 people that they asked to dedicate to the Nike business. And at the tender age of 25 or so, that I was asked to be the lead for that team. And then eventually, I mean, you led one of the groundbreaking piece of work called Nike Plus and the Nike Fuel Band. Yeah.
I think the other step up moments, or I would call step up moments, are these like breakout moments. I mean, there's several. You're talking about RGA and pitching. We once had a pitch, pitching against other agencies like Wyden, who were like kind of bigger than us and were embedded with Nike, and we had another pitch. And we had really kind of rallied a team around it. It was like one of those big moments, right? And this is before Nike Plus was going to become a bigger thing. There was another line of work that was that we were allowed to pitch for. And we put together some really great ideas, great prototypes, and felt pretty good about it. And we were flying out. I was part of the team flying out to give the pitch. And you'll remember, like, Nick Law was like lead at that point, and Jill Nussbaum. And we were going to the airport. And I think Nick got a phone call. And Nick was I don't know if it's chief creative. He was like the senior guy.
The big dog, yeah.
Right? He was the big guy. He got a phone call at the airport. I think his wife was about to give birth or something. So he's got to go. So then it's up to me and more Jill, I think, had to take the lead on this more than I did. But that was an interesting moment as well, right? Where you have to step up to that moment. You have to meet the moment, as a team. And it helps when you've done all the preparation. You're coming in with a whole team behind you of work, but you have to deliver, right? And we actually won that pitch. I don't take credit for that. I actually give that shout out to Jill for that. I think she led the major part of that. I had a smaller role in that presentation. But that was an interesting step up moment, right? And I think there are those, when I track back, it's those moments where your preparation allows you to meet an opportunity, which is the definition of luck, where you've done the hard work, and then all of a sudden there's a gap you need to leap over. So you have to bring about a certain amount of courage, I guess. I would say another moment for me career-wise, personally, was when I left, or rather when I went to apply for a job at Google. And it was a big deal for me to apply, because Google was like the big company then, and I had not worked at a big tech company before. So I had prepared a presentation. I had fun with the presentation I created. And I spent a lot of time memorizing and just preparing. And I can remember being nervous about it, but also feeling pretty prepared. And it was one of these things where you give this presentation to a group of people, and then you have like 8 hours of one-on-one conversation. So it was pretty grueling. So I was definitely nervous, but I think that if you're talking about things that that's your experience, so that you have deep familiarity in, it usually works out. So I think that what I've learned from doing presentations is a presentation is a story. And so you have to get good at storying. So what makes a good story? There's the actual story itself, which has like a beginning, middle, and end. It has conflict, drama. There's a rhythm to a story and how that's presented. And then there is the performance of the story. And so those are different phases. When we've done, like Ray's done plenty of pitches, and that's what he's doing. It's like you have all these ideas and all this content, and maybe if I'm presenting myself, I'm putting together all of my work and thinking about this audience and what they would take as valuable. If I'm presenting a pitch, I might start from that audience perspective on this is a problem they have in their business, and I need to kind of frame that problem. I need to present an understanding of that problem, and I need to do that in a compelling way before I show the work, right? And so there's the stitching together of that story you want to tell. And once you have that, then you have to practice the performance of that story. And you do that again and again. I was talking to people earlier about learning sado, like learning tea ceremony. You practice again the movements again and again and again and again. And that's what I've learned to do, is that I would practice things until I couldn't help but say them. I remember some presentations. I had to once present on at the Apple keynote for Instagram. And that's a whole other story. But I had a certain number of lines I had to say, and I had to be at certain places on a stage at a certain time. And for a period of weeks, I was memorizing this thing, and I could say it today. So you have to, it's just ends up being a lot about repetition at that point. And once you repeat it enough, it can become natural again. But it starts off very like scripted and robotic, but it's all about storytelling and learning how to do that well. I think usually you want to start off with energy, and you want to start off with something that captures everyone's attention. You know, like in the business context, you're one meeting of 8 meetings they have that day, and you want to be interesting. So sometimes that's telling a joke, sometimes that's being provocative in some way, but it wakes people up and helps them pay attention, right? And then you kind of get into some sort of arc that gives them something familiar. You might be, if it's a business, you're presenting them information that they probably know already, and then you're presenting them information that you've taken what they've given you, what they know, and then you give them your perspective on what they think they know. And then you show creative work, that are new ideas that are based on that understanding. And then you, wave goodbye and hope for the best. But that's a broad kind of, I guess, picture of how I'd done it in the past.
So just moving forward in your career journey, going from RGA to YouTube, Google.
So from RGA, I decided I didn't want to do client work anymore.
Yeah.
And so I took the leap to work at Foursquare for a little while in New York, which was a star in that time of like mobile apps, right? The check-in locations, that sort of thing. And then from Foursquare, I went to YouTube at Google, and then from there to Instagram.
Yeah. And you've been at Instagram for how long now? Quite a while.
So over 7 years. My current job actually has shifted from Instagram work to more metaverse work, which is another podcast topic altogether. But yeah, until recently it was just focused on Instagram. And so 4 of that years of that time was running all of design for Instagram, which is pretty incredible experience, I think, professionally. And then we decided to launch a team in Japan, and so I raised my hand to do that. And so I've been in Tokyo now for 2 years.
I mean, redesigning a brand and product that's being used by, if not millions, but billions of people. Yeah, tell us a little bit of what that experience is like. And,
yeah, that part we weren't at a billion yet, but
you weren't at a billion
yet. We were probably hundreds of millions,
yeah.
Which is enough to keep you up at night.
Right.
First off, I don't ever recommend doing it unless you really feel like you have to. I think it's common for new heads of design to go in and then redo it all, but that was a project that was handed to me, and because the co-founders of the product wanted to do it at that time. And so I was just trying to do it the best way I knew how. So, it started with just rethinking the logo itself, or the icon. And of course, you pull at that thread and it's like, well, if you're going to do that, you need to think about this. You need to think about the brand system overall, which of course, the main touch point of the brand is the UI. So you also have to refresh that. And so it became a much bigger project. But it ended up being, I think, well-timed, because Instagram was going through a lot of changes. It had been just the photo app that you knew for Square Photos. And it was already a big deal to introduce video, let alone photos that weren't Square. And then But from that moment after we launched, there's just been the litany of changes that have come to Instagram that have helped it grow and be the force that it is. Yeah.
Yeah. From the outside, you've had a really, really successful career and you've done some amazing work. Let's talk about failure. What professional failures or mistakes have you had, and what have you learned from them?
The only thing I come with, I wonder whether I would consider. So I was at when I moved over to Google and worked at YouTube. I left there earlier than I had planned to. Right. I don't wonder if I consider that a failure, because I had gone there with certain expectations of what I wanted to do and accomplish in that role. And there's a long story of things that happened, that commonly happen into big tech companies, and I didn't know, that led to me hitting a wall there. And, sometimes I wonder whether there was a different way to handle that situation. But what I learned by weathering that situation is I learned a lesson about resilience, and I learned a lesson about you may have a plan and managing your own expectations. You may have expectations in your mind how you see a story playing out, but you really don't know how it's going to play out. You have no idea, right? And things change very quickly, and you have to be able to accept and adapt to those changes. And I should mention that, like, when I moved to that job, I moved my entire family out, and I had 4 kids. We just had twins, and so it was a stressful move. And we left all of our like extended family behind when we moved to that role. And so to have that not go the way that I had hoped and thought it would go was, I guess, a type of failure, and something that required that I basically reboot my career out west working in these larger tech companies. But luckily ended up at Instagram and things worked out in the end. But
things worked out pretty well.
Yeah.
Over the course of your career, and the web has evolved, the internet has evolved. I think when we got into this industry, we didn't have an iPhone or smartphone. Mm-hmm. And in the past 20 years, you've been part of this evolution and the revolution of these devices. Mm-hmm. And you've been at the forefront of creating that interface, at different places, first for brands, and then going to some of the biggest tech companies like the Googles and Googles of the world. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure, you didn't expect that kind of journey when you were cutting assets, for 8 hours. Yeah. Looking back, would you do anything differently is one. And second is, what advice do you have to your 25-year-old self?
Would I do anything differently besides like studying Japanese sooner? I don't know. Things like language learning. I think I probably would have to say no, because I'm happy with where I've ended up. I think, though, when you do look back and you trace these steps and you trace these moments, it pretty much becomes clear that it's an impossible set of things that came together to get you to where you are. The door opens because you happen to meet someone at a certain point in time, or these things you couldn't plot them out or script them out. They just kind of happen, and so I feel that, given that, then, there isn't anything I would really do differently. There's certainly things I wish I started learning earlier, but not decision-wise, no. So I think advice that I would give to my 25-year-old self, one, I think I would encourage that person to be courageous, continue to work as hard as they did work at that time, and be committed. I think try to cultivate less of a scarcity mindset, meaning imagine that I think I've learned that sometimes I can still have limiting beliefs in my own mind of things that I couldn't imagine being true. I couldn't imagine I live in Tokyo. I could not imagine that. And so I actually don't think that's a great feature of me. And so it's something I would have loved to have started to change earlier, to just allow myself, I guess, to dream bigger than I think I was then. But I wouldn't change anything. Mm-hmm. And I think that my curiosity and enjoyment of being creative, and my real passion for this space, this overlap of design and technology that I've worked and been fortunate to work in, I think I would have done it no matter what, right? It's the sort of thing where even if it didn't make money or whatever, I probably would have continued to do because it just felt right.
Yeah.
But happened to catch it at a good point in time where it was very interesting and became more relevant over time.
Yeah. I think what I didn't know about Ian was how he got interested in graphic design at an early age. And I really related to what he said about the effort that he put in doing simple things. So he talked about when he was freelancing, he had a part-time job, and he mentioned about cutting graphic assets for some project that he was working on. And what that means, for people who are not designers, cutting assets is actually a pretty boring task. But somebody has to do it. And I used to do it when I was in my early 20s as well. And back then, when you created a web page, you would design a page. And before you turn that page into a web page, somebody has to cut it up so that either that person or somebody else can code it and to make sure that it displays well on the website. So, and back then, initially, before there was software that did it for you, somebody had to manually cut it. And he was talking about having to do it for 8 hours a day. But for him, even though it was a boring and tedious task that he had to do, he felt like, okay, this is something that I can enjoy, making something visual and making it work on a screen, even though there's this tedious, boring part to get to it, that I could, spend the time to do it. And I could really relate to that comment because I remember having a similar moment when I was in college. And I think I was a freshman. My second semester as a freshman, I did my first all-nighter. I put an all-nighter. I had an assignment, an art class assignment, and in order to finish it, I had to stay up all night. And I did it, I stayed up until 5 o'clock in the morning to get it done. And, the sun was coming up, and I think it was like late in the fall season. Stepped out, the air was kind of cold, but the sun was rising. And it was I still remember to this day, the feeling that I had having spent, hours and hours and hours working on my assignment. And it was really tiring and really, really challenging. But then the sense of accomplishment, the sense of satisfaction, the feeling of euphoria that I got from doing that task and then seeing the sun come up was such a memorable experience. And even though it was tiring, I was like, okay, this is something that I could do. And it was really refreshing to hear from an old friend who's been in the same industry, who's done similar things as me in different, different career path. I think he and I were lucky in finding something that we both loved, even if it was really challenging, that we can commit ourselves to it. So I think the takeaway that I had from this interview, there were so many interesting anecdotes and interesting comments that he had made, but finding what you love, I think you have to go through the challenge of doing something that may be boring, that may be tedious, that may be really hard. But when you come out of it, and if you feel good about what you just went through, or if you feel accomplishment, having gone through that, then it's something that you might want to pursue as your career. That was the most memorable part of my conversation with Ian. This was the first part of my conversation with Ian Spalter, the head of design at Instagram and an old friend of mine from almost 20 years ago. It was an enlightening as well as an exciting conversation with him because there were so many anecdotes that I didn't know about Ian. Next, we'll be sharing with you the second part of this conversation, so stay tuned.